he started saying the very same things he'd said to us in the confines of that private small room, I knew that this was going to be an absolute fire starter.
Oh, wow.
But the size of the fire got bigger and bigger as every terrible answer progressed.
Lovely to meet you. I'm so excited to get the chance to speak with you and talk to you all about this book. So tell me, why was now the perfect time to write this book, and what can readers expect?
Well, basically, as you know, the Prince Andrew interview has been out there for quite some time. There's been a ton of coverage about it, and everything that could be written about it has, we think, been written, except this really essential little part that is my story, which is how the interview came about from the very beginning, the first interaction, the first second. And so I wrote the book now that all of the litigation had concluded, to be honest. And I wanted to write this and tell my tiny little part in this huge historic tale.
Well, you actually had a very big part in this historic tale because you were working on securing this interview for a very long time, right? It was pretty much a year in the making, correct? Maybe even longer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first email, which was kind of like an innocent one, came a year before you guys saw that No Sweat Pizza Express, ordinary shooting weekend, kind of like crazy thing that we all experienced together. But I was basically on email contact with them for a little while. And then basically the May was when I had the first face-to-face meeting with his now notorious chief of staff, whose name was Amanda Thirsk. Mm-hmm. And I was invited on my own to Buckingham Palace. And the crazy thing, Christina, is I thought it was a bit of a jaunt, to be honest. I hadn't really told my boss. My job is to try and convince people 999 times out of 1,000, nothing ever happens. And this was never going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Well, did you initially approach the palace to have this sit-down interview? But it had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein at first, correct? This just kind of snowballed, right?
Exactly. So the first contact was actually via PR because as the job that I was doing, I mean, you guys call it a booker, we call it an interviews producer. You're just waiting for this relentless number of emails inviting you to do this and that. And often you're just like chasing stuff relentlessly for sometimes years. And this started with an innocent email asking to do what we call a puff piece. And that is like a piece where it's an advert, if you like, for somebody who's running a foundation in his case, or writing a book in mine. And you are kind of invited to do that. Now, we don't do those because that's editorially, that compromises us and our ability to ask hard news questions, because this program that I was working on, Newsnight, the toughest of the tough. So it went away. And then I left with the email, do get back if the situation changes, if you want to do a hard news interview. And usually nothing ever comes of that. That's just like a pointless thing to write. But lo and behold, 6 months later, I get another email inviting me to Buckingham Palace. Am I available? Well, yes, I am available. And on the Monday of that particular random week, before Epstein was arrested, before Maxwell was arrested, before things really kicked off, there I am on my own, face to face with Amanda Thirsk in a tiny room in Buckingham Palace, like a shrine to Prince Andrew, these photos, wooden, dark, cup of tea, very British. And that was the first time I made any contact with the palace or with her.
Wow. So she reached back out to you to continue the conversation. So they wanted to clear things up, correct?
That's right. So basically, after that meeting, there was a red line in that negotiation. I got Brexit on the table. Remember that? We used to talk about that in this country.
Right.
Meghan and Harry, baby Archie, yes. Future of the monarchy. But she said at that stage in May that there was a red line. And at that stage, Epstein wasn't the huge mammoth story, but that they didn't want to talk about that. And that was the end of it, Christina, because conditions are not our thing. So I went away, asked them to reconsider. They didn't. We didn't go ahead. And then I do that merry dance, which you'll be very familiar with, between being persuasive and being basically a pain in the bum.
Right.
You send, every few weeks, you send another little email. And every time the story moved, which it was relentlessly, Epstein's incarcerated, Epstein's sentenced, Epstein's dead, Maxwell's arrested. Every single time something moves, you send another email and you ask for another meeting. And eventually, we're now in October. So I've had, months and months of my merry dance of trying not to be a pain in the bum. She invites me back. And this time I take my presenter, Emily Maitlis. I'd never negotiated with her before, but there's blood in the water, to be frank. You know something might be here and you're going to throw every resource at it. So off we went for meeting face-to-face number 2.
What was that meeting like when you met him? And, was there anything off the table when it came to questions about Jeffrey Epstein in that initial meeting?
Well, in the second meeting, it was just me and my presenter and with Amanda Thirsk. That went very well. We didn't know if we had anything that was actually physically going to happen. And so a few weeks later, we're then invited back again. That obviously had gone well. And that was the face-to-face with Prince Andrew in Buckingham Palace. And my deputy editor, who's now the editor of my program that I used to work at, Stuart McLean is his name. He was the exec. So obviously an important part as well in the latter stage. And we all went back, the three of us, for this unprecedented. We use that word a lot, but let's really use it fairly this time. A face-to-face negotiation with a member of the royal family accused of heinous associations and heinous crimes. And that, in my entire career, was something that I had never done before. And it was really quite an extraordinary experience.
What was his tone like and what was his mannerisms like when you were sitting down for that interview? Was he nervous to do so? Was he ready to kind of set his story straight? How was he kind of feeling leading up to the interview?
So on the physical day of the interview itself or in the negotiation?
Both.
So on the day of the negotiation, I'd say he was in very good spirits. I think, he's obviously in his home. Right. It's a place of power for him. He comes from a position of power and he spent a couple of hours with us. He threw a complete curveball at us. I think accidentally, his daughter, Princess Beatrice, came to that final negotiation. Wow. And I had researched myself, to like an early grave, working on gaming this. How's this going to work? What's he going to say? How am I going to present myself? Do I lead with funny? Do I lead with serious? What are you going to be in that room? And then he brought his daughter. And to negotiate those delicate issues of which he was accused and those associations which were pernicious and appalling in front of his young daughter was quite something. And so that was a real curveball. But he was in, I would say, very good spirits. I would say jocular. I found him very easy to negotiate with. He's very good with speaking truth to power, which is my specialist subject. So lucky that he's good with that. And he was very congenial and casual and not at all difficult. And crucially, the thing I found most interesting about him that was very discordant with the interview itself, a really good listener. He listened to what I said and the other people in the room, and he actually took it in and he responded. He didn't talk over us or undermine us. So it was quite an unusual negotiation in that sense, because usually the biggest person in the room is the biggest ego and they take up all the space. He wasn't like that. And then, of course, the interview itself, a completely different kettle of fish.
Right. So no red lines in the initial lead up to the interview from Beatrice or Prince Andrew.
We don't do red lines.
Right.
I think that's one of the kind of like the fallacies about the work that we do. I appreciate some people do red lines. Yeah. I'm not judging them, but in news and in the BBC and in the type of work we did, it's all or nothing on those red lines. Once you have a red line, that's it. Your integrity is dashed. Yeah. So we don't do red lines.
Yeah.
So we don't do red lines. And so on that particular day, no red lines were suggested. And had they been, they wouldn't have been received.
Yeah. No. Amazing. So going into that interview, you sit down, the interview is starting to roll. When did you realize, like, wow, this is going to go down in royal history? Probably not for a good reason, in Prince Andrew's light. I mean, great for the BBC, great for the program. But when did you realize that this is, oh my God, this is going off the rails?
I think the moment I realized was the moment when there's a space, Christina, and you will know it yourself, between what we usually call the briefing conversation, where like the prospective interviewee gives 10 out of 10 answers. They say crazy stuff that's incredible. And then you put them in front of a camera and 9 times out of 10, they clam up completely. They say nothing interesting. And it's like you were almost like deluded or something, and it makes you look bad. This time, that did not happen. Because on the Monday, we had heard the things that you heard for the first time. We'd heard about no sweat. We'd heard about this supposed alibi, Pizza Express, Woking, which is a sort of a small town over here, like an obscure place. So a strange thing for a prince to do. And then lo and behold, on that Thursday, just 3 days later, he actually said it on camera. So the first time he started saying the very same things he'd said to us in the confines of that private small room, I knew that this was going to be an absolute fire starter.
Oh, wow.
But the size of the fire got bigger and bigger as every terrible answer progressed.
So he said the whole sweating thing, the Pizza Express, in the pre-interview. So you knew that this was coming.
I knew it might come. I couldn't believe it would come. And sitting there 15 feet behind him, watching his foot tapping, looking at the back of his head, I'm in eye contact theoretically with my brilliant presenter, Emily Maitlis, but we're making no eye contact because this obviously is the interview of her career as well as, of mine. And sitting there, hearing him repeat that on camera, I literally could not believe it. And every answer, you're like, that's the headline. No. No, that's the headline. And the ante is just upped and upped and upped. I'm waiting for that apology. We're waiting for him to say he regrets the friendship. And sitting there minute after minute, it never came.
How did Emily go into that, preparing for that? And how did, how did your team come up with those questions and kind of delicately navigate that interview?
I think the word delicate is such a great one because Emily is a brilliant anchor. She's obviously one of the most famous anchors in our country and now, no doubt, the world after this interview. And the temptation, I think, is to do what we usually do, which is a mauling, to try and cross-examine him. I'm a criminal barrister by education. And so, that's the kind of temptation to try and bring him down. But what was so clever about this is our editor, Esme Wren, and Emily prepared separately, the two of them. She had stayed back in the office. She hadn't come to any of the meetings. She was basically the only sane one left on the team because we were all basically delirious. And it was a huge responsibility, not just for us and the broadcaster, but of course for the young women who had made these allegations and accusations that were so horrific. So we bore the responsibility for that. So Emily and the editor put together a systematic, methodical, careful dissection of the entire story, which I think played out so brilliantly because it didn't get his back up. And we knew if he spoke the way he had spoken to us, his answers could 50-50. He could have come up with good stuff since we'd seen him, who knows? But the answers were everything. The questions were just the way to open the door.
Hey everyone, I'm Christina Garibaldi, the host of Us Weekly Celebrity Coverage. Don't forget to hit subscribe for the latest celebrity news, tips, and video. And for much more content, make sure you head on over to usmagazine.com, the official home of Us Weekly Magazine.